Some names carry history like a wound that never healed. What happens when a forgotten man's name ripples through a room built to judge him? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to follow this incredible journey that honors the unseen sacrifices of our heroes. He never stood straight anymore. Harry Filan's shoulders sloped from years of sleeping on benches, ducking into alleyways, and hauling a lifetime inside a duffel bag that had outlasted 3 cities and 1 marriage. The weight wasn't just on his back, it was inside him too. Old commands echoing from younger years, flares of sound that still caught him off guard. Sometimes he could still hear his staff sergeant yelling, and sometimes he saw the kid he couldn't save in Quezon, eyes wide and glassy, staring past the jungle canopy toward a freedom they both never reached. This morning, Harry sat on the hard bench outside Courtroom 4B, chewing the inside of his cheek like it owed him money. He wore the same olive field jacket he'd had for decades, the one with the frayed cuffs and faded USMC patch barely clinging to the shoulder. A court officer glanced his way, then away again. Harry wasn't worth a second look. Just another old homeless guy, another vagrant clogging up the docket with loitering and failure to appear and some busted taillight ticket from a car he hadn't driven since the Obama administration. The door creaked open. "Feelin', Harry?" a voice called. Harry stood with the grace of rusted metal. His knees protested. His pride didn't. He shuffled in slowly, the chain on his right boot clinking faintly, a security precaution, even though his hands were free. No one thought Harry Filan was dangerous, just tired. Inside, the courtroom hummed low. A few attorneys buried their noses in case files. The stenographer barely looked up. Judge Emily Harper sat tall behind the bench, glasses perched halfway down her nose as she reviewed the morning's docket. Her gavel lay untouched. "Mr. Filan," she began without looking up, "you've been cited for—" She stopped. Her brow furrowed. Emily Harper blinked once, twice, then slowly raised her gaze. Her eyes landed on him like a pin hitting a balloon. Soft, but shattering. Harry didn't blink. He never did when people looked at him like that. They usually stopped once they saw the dirt, the creased skin, the beard that had grown gray in patches and coarse in others. But she wasn't looking at his beard. She was looking at his name. "Billin, Harry." Her voice dipped now, dropped into a register usually reserved for eulogies. "United States Marine Corps?" Harry nodded, barely. "Yes, ma'am." She cleared her throat and pushed her glasses up. "You served in Nam?" There was a pause before he replied, 70 to 71, Bravo Company, Da Nang, Quezon." A man in a suit, prosecutor probably, shifted in his seat, suddenly more attentive. Judge Harper leaned back, her fingers laced together. Her next words were not scripted. "My brother was medevaced out of Quezon in 71. Lost his leg. Said a Marine pulled him from a blast zone under heavy fire. Said he never saw the guy again." She paused, heart caught in her throat. "Said his name was Filan." Harry looked down, not because he was ashamed, because the memory came back like it always did, with sound first, screaming, then mortar fire, then the smell of blood and metal. He remembered the kid, blonde, barely shaving, crying through clenched teeth as he dragged him to the chopper. Never thought he'd see anything like that again. And now here she was, his sister, wearing black robes and holding the power of the state in her steady voice. But Harry didn't speak. He didn't need to. The courtroom had fallen silent. Even the bailiff was standing still, halfway through sipping his morning coffee. Something unspoken passed through the room, like electricity from a forgotten circuit finally finding a path to ground. Judge Harper leaned forward, the weight of her authority shifting. "Court will take a brief recess," she said quickly. Before anyone could object, she stood and disappeared through the side door. Harry remained still, not because he didn't want to sit, but because everyone in that courtroom was looking at him differently now. The public defender looked confused. The prosecutor looked suddenly unsure, But Harry just waited. The door clicked shut behind her, but Judge Emily Harper didn't stop walking. Her heels echoed off the corridor floor in sharp, deliberate beats. Down the hallway, past portraits of dead justices and old flags in glass, past the smell of lemon-scented wax on marble. When she reached her chambers, she pressed her palm flat against the door before entering, as if the wood might absorb her thoughts and slow her heart. Inside, she dropped into her chair with more weight than she intended. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them tight, anchoring herself with the pressure. She'd pride herself on never letting emotion bleed into her work. But this was different. She opened the court record again, this time not as a judge but as a sister. Born Harry Thomas, age 70, prior service, U.S. Marine Corps, enlisted 1969, honorably discharged. Commendations, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy Commendation with V. She stopped reading there. She didn't need the rest. In the courtroom they saw a homeless man with calloused hands and a blank stare. But to her brother Nathan, that man had been a ghost from the past, a ghost who carried him out of death's reach, then vanished. Nathan had spoken of him like a myth, the man with smoke-streaked skin, a busted shoulder, and hands that didn't shake even under gunfire. Nathan had always said he was going to find him one day, that he owed his life to a man named Harry Filan, but then cancer came first. Emily squeezed her eyes shut for a moment and reached into her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo, one she kept in a sealed envelope. Nathan in uniform, grinning like a fool, an arm around her shoulders, his left pant leg neatly folded up and pinned. A crutch leaned against his side. A part of her had never forgiven the war. Not for what it did to Nathan's body, but for what it did to his eyes. She sat in silence a little longer before standing. When she re-entered the courtroom, no one moved until she reached the bench. Even the chatter from the hallway outside seemed to hush as she resumed her seat. Harry still stood where she'd left him, hands behind his back, shoulders square, eyes straight ahead. He hadn't shifted an inch. She cleared her throat and spoke slowly, directly. "Mr. Filan, I need you to answer a few questions for the record." Harry gave a small nod. "Where are you stationed near Hill 861 during the spring of 71? His voice came low but clear. "Yes, ma'am. Firebase had been hit pretty hard. We were on patrol rotations, lost a lot of boys there," she continued, her face unreadable. "Do you recall a private named Nathan Harper? He was 19, blonde, green eyes, from Missouri." Harry didn't speak for a second, but his jaw clenched. That name, Harper, had burned its way into his brain like so many others. But there were fewer names now. The years had taken many. Some were faded, some buried. Nathan wasn't. Nathan was the one who screamed in his sleep. Harry said finally. "Called him Missouri 'cause he never shut up about it. Laughed too much, cracked jokes when everyone else was chewing their nerves." Emily nodded, eyes glistening. "He was my brother." Harry's head tilted slightly. He looked at her again, really looked. Something in his eyes flickered. Not surprise, not recognition. Something deeper, something like sorrow. "Didn't know he made it." "He did," she said softly. "Because of you." The room remained still for a long breath, then another. The silence broke when the prosecutor stood abruptly. "Your Honor," he said, stiff, unsure, "I believe we may want to discuss an alternative to proceeding with these charges." Emily turned to him, her voice measured. "Mr. Conway, you were about to recommend community service, were you not?" "Yes, Your Honor." "See," she said, gaze turning back to Harry. "And what does the defense say?" The public defender, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 5 years out of law school, stood and cleared her throat. "Your Honor, my client has served his country with honor and distinction. He's faced systemic challenges, housing insecurity, untreated trauma, and a complete failure of veteran care networks. I move for full dismissal." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at Harry. Mr. Filan, if this court were to dismiss all current charges, do you have a place to go?" "No, ma'am," Harry said without flinching, "but I've had worse." "I don't doubt that," she replied, "but that's not good enough." She turned to the clerk and tapped the bench gently. "Strike all charges from the record, seal the case. Mr. Filan is free to go." The clerk scribbled quickly. The prosecutor said nothing. The defender gave a tight, relieved smile. But what happened next, no one expected. As Harry stepped back, preparing to leave, a man in the gallery, gray hair, tweed coat, veteran's pin on his lapel, rose to his feet, silent, upright. Then another man. Then a woman in a red jacket. Then two more in uniform. By the time Harry reached the doors, the entire courtroom was standing. Quiet, still, not applauding, just standing. Not because they were told, not because the bailiff ordered it, because his name had finally been remembered. Harry paused near the door, suddenly unsure of what to do. His lips parted slightly, but the words caught. His eyes glistened. The only movement was the flicker of his fingers at his side, a hesitant salute, unfinished. The courtroom didn't speak. Didn't need to. A quiet kind of honor filled the room. He stepped through the doors and into the hallway, but he was not the same man who had entered that morning. He had come in a ghost. He left human. Harry Filan didn't say a word as he stepped out of the courthouse and into the cold spring air, but the moment the door shut behind him, the silence struck him harder than any verdict ever could. The courtroom had risen for him, not because he demanded it, not because he earned it recently, but because, somehow, the echo of what he'd done decades ago had finally made its way back to him. He stood still on the courthouse steps, a beat-up man in a beat-up jacket, gripping the railing like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting under his feet. Cars passed. Pigeons flitted over the sidewalk. Life resumed, indifferent. A moment later, the door behind him opened. Mr. Filan. He didn't turn. Harry. That made him turn. Judge Emily Harper was no longer wearing her robes. She stood in a navy blue suit, her hair pinned neatly, but her face softened. Not the bench mask she wore. This was personal. "I'd like to talk," she said, "if you're willing." He didn't answer right away, just nodded once, and they started walking side by side down the block. She didn't offer him a ride. Somehow, she knew he wouldn't take it. They walked past a bakery where the smell of cinnamon made Harry's stomach twist. He hadn't eaten since the day before. Emily noticed the way his eyes hovered on the window. "Come on," she said. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The warm air met them like a quilt. A young woman behind the counter greeted them with practiced cheer, but her smile faltered just slightly when she looked at Harry. That flicker of judgment. The kind that never meant harm, but always stung the most. Emily stepped in without missing a beat. "2 coffees. And a couple of those muffins, please." They sat at a small table near the back, away from the windows. Harry didn't touch the food at first. He just stared at it like it might be a test. "I didn't say thank you in there," Emily said, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. "Didn't feel right, not in front of everyone." "You didn't have to say anything," Harry replied. "I do now." She met his eyes. "My brother wouldn't have lived past 19 if it weren't for you." Harry gave a soft breath of something between a laugh and a sigh. "Lot of kids didn't." Emily looked down for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. "What happened to you after that? After you pulled him out?" Harry sat back, rubbing a scar near his collarbone with 2 fingers. "Didn't make it far. Got hit 2 weeks later. Took shrapnel to the side. Wasn't supposed to survive, but I guess stubbornness runs deep in Marines. Got shipped home with a hole in my liver and a head full of noise." He picked at the corner of the muffin, finally lifting a piece and popping it in his mouth. "They gave me a medal and a bus ticket," he said with a smirk. "No therapy, no direction, just a thank you for your service in a world that didn't need me anymore." "I'm sorry," she said. and it sounded real. Harry shrugged. Ain't your fault. Wasn't anyone's, really. War just has a way of cutting you out of the cloth you were made for, then tossing you back into the pile like you still fit. He looked around the cafe. You ever try explaining to someone why you flinch when a backfiring car sounds like incoming, or why you sleep better in a park than under a roof? Emily said nothing. Harry leaned forward slightly, voice quiet. I spent a few years trying to get it together. Worked on a construction crew. Almost got married again. Then the bad days came more often than the good ones. That woman didn't sign up for a man who screamed at shadows. I understand more than you think, Emily said. Nathan, he never talked about it, not really. But you could see it in how he folded laundry like it was body bags. Or how he'd go silent every 4th of July. Harry's gaze softened at that. Is he now? He asked. Her smile faded. Passed 2 years ago. Cancer. Fast and cruel. Harry nodded slowly. I'm sorry. They sat in silence for a moment that stretched wide between them. Then Emily reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is from my brother, she said. He made me promise I'd keep it until I found you. He said you might come through this courthouse one day, though I didn't think he meant it literally. Harry hesitated, then took the envelope. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. Inside was a letter, written in the sharp, looping scrawl of a man trained to fill out field reports in the rain. Harry, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it to thank you myself. You saved my life. I spent every year after trying to live like I earned it. I became a father, a teacher, a man who tried not to waste breath. All because you dragged me out of hell. I never forgot you. And I don't want you to be forgotten either. You matter, even now, especially now. Whatever they say about you, whatever you're facing when you read this, know that someone out there is alive because of you. And that's more than most men ever get to say. Semper Fi, brother. Nathan Harper. Harry folded the letter slowly, pressing it like something sacred. He didn't speak for a long time. Emily broke the silence. There's more. The Veterans Board, after today's hearing, I made a few calls. Your DD 214 still lists you as eligible for full benefits. Someone just never filed the follow-through paperwork after your medical discharge. Harry blinked. I'm saying you've got medical care starting next week. I've arranged for a caseworker to help get you into housing, and if you want, there's a veterans center a few blocks from here that could use a mentor. Harry let the information settle, like rain soaking into dry earth. He looked down at the letter again, and for the first time in a very long time his eyes misted over. But no tears fell, just the weight lifted. You didn't have to do that, he said. No, Emily said. But I wanted to, and you deserve it. He nodded slowly. I don't know what to say. You already said it, she replied. You lived. They sat together a while longer in that little cafe, 2 lives intertwined by war and blood and a promise carried across time. For the first time in decades, Harry Filan didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The house wasn't much, just a modest single story with faded siding and a chain-link fence that creaked in the breeze. The kind of place people drove past without thinking twice. But to Harry Filan, it looked like the White House. His boots crunched the gravel path leading up to the porch. He carried only one bag now, a new one, courtesy of the caseworker Emily had arranged. He still kept his old duffel, though, not because he needed it, but because it had been with him longer than most people had. The new bag held socks, a phone, 2 shirts, and something that felt unfamiliar after years of absence, a copy of a lease with his name on it. The door opened before he reached it. A man in a ball cap stepped out. Mid-30s, arms folded, sturdy stance. He didn't smile, but his voice was warm. Mr. Filan? Harry nodded. Welcome home. They shook hands. The man introduced himself as Travis, another vet, Afghanistan 2 tours, now managing the Veteran Transitional Housing Program, said Harry had the back unit, already furnished, nothing fancy, but clean, quiet, private. Harry stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar and old paint. There was a small kitchenette, a couch, and a neatly made bed in the corner. A folded blanket lay at the foot. The simple sight of a pillow with no one else's name on it almost brought Harry to his knees. He placed his bags down slowly, carefully, then sat. It didn't sink in right away. It would take time. His muscles didn't understand what it meant to stop bracing for cold. His shoulders were still drawn in like he might be told to move along. But somewhere, deep in his chest, something unclenched. He was inside, and no one was going to ask him to leave. 2 weeks passed like a slow sunrise. Each morning started with black coffee brewed in his own pot. Each night ended with a full stomach and a real bed. He still walked the neighborhood sometimes, more out of habit than need, the way some old dogs still do perimeter checks out of instinct. But people saw him now. They waved. One woman even brought over banana bread. At the Veterans Center, the first few visits had been quiet. He didn't say much, just sat in on group sessions, nodding at stories that mirrored his own. A lot of younger guys looked at him with that mix of curiosity and distance, like they weren't sure what to make of the man who looked like he'd stepped out of a black-and-white photograph. But then one of them, Louise, 27, Marine Corps, started hanging back after sessions, asked Harry about Da Nang. Then another, a Navy vet named Clara, asked how he dealt with the night terrors. Harry didn't have all the answers, but he knew how to listen, and in a world full of noise, sometimes that was enough. One afternoon, after he shared a story about dragging a wounded buddy 3 clicks under fire, one of the younger guys clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You should be running this group, old man." Harry chuckled. "I don't run much of anything these days, but I'll sit with you as long as you need." Soon he had a spot at the circle reserved. Someone started calling him Coach. The nickname stuck. Then came the ceremony. Emily called him on a Tuesday, said the mayor's office was organizing a veterans recognition event downtown. They wanted him there. "Only if it's not one of those things where they make me stand on stage," he said. Her voice on the other end smiled. "No speeches, but you might want to wear something clean." On the day of the event, Harry wore a borrowed blazer and a tie that he couldn't remember how to knot. Luis helped him with it. Clara insisted on pinning an old Marine Corps lapel on his collar. When he arrived at City Hall Plaza, he was overwhelmed. Rows of chairs, a flag backdrop, a brass band, families holding up homemade signs thanking their loved ones. It was more pomp than Harry was used to, but he kept his head high. At first, he didn't notice the people shifting in their seats. Not until the announcer reached the final name. "Today," the speaker said, "we honor one more veteran, one who never asked for recognition, who never sought the spotlight, but whose actions saved lives, whose courage inspired generations, and whose name reminds us that valor does not always wear a crown." The crowd hushed. Mr. Harry Thomas Filan. He stood reluctantly. His body moved slow, but his spirit rose with him. The applause that followed started small, then built. Not the loud, showy kind, the kind that came from the chest, that lingered in the air like truth. Emily was at the front of the crowd, her hand over her heart. Travis stood beside her. The vets from the center were there too, each nodding, proud. A Marine in dress blues stepped forward with a small box. Inside it was a newly minted copy of the Navy Cross, a formality rectified from records that had long sat buried. Alongside it, a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs confirming the full reinstatement of Harry's service benefits, housing eligibility, and lifetime medical coverage. But what moved Harry most wasn't the medal. It was what happened next. Someone in the front row stood and saluted. Then another, and another. Dozens of civilians rose to their feet, not out of duty, but because they finally understood who was standing in front of them. The man who'd once slept under bridges was now standing under flags. The name they once passed on a docket now echoed with reverence. He gave a small, firm nod. No speech, just eyes that met every gaze and held them gently. After the event, Harry didn't stay for the cameras. He walked a few blocks to the Veterans Center, sat in his usual seat. Luis asked how it felt. Harry thought for a moment. "Like I'd been marching for 50 years, he said, and someone just finally said, 'You can rest now.'" That night, back at his place, he poured himself a cup of coffee and pulled out the letter from Nathan again. He didn't read it, just held it. A knock at the door made him pause. When he opened it, a young boy, maybe 10, stood there holding a folded American flag and a note. "Hi," the boy said. "My dad said you were a real hero. He asked me to bring this to you." Harry accepted the flag, unfolding it slowly. Inside the triangle fold was a photo of Nathan, smiling wide, holding a baby. On the back of the note, just 5 words. "Because of you, I exist." Harry stepped outside. The night was still, the wind gentle. For the first time in decades, Harry Filan didn't feel like a ghost of the war. He felt like a man whose name meant something. And for a man who had once been forgotten, that was everything.